It is conference championship weekend, the final four of the National Football League, a trip to Las Vegas on the line for these four teams. Johnny Sports Network here to provide you with my predictions for conference championship weekend. And what a week we had last week. I was hoping that we would have had some good games last week after I felt disappointed by the wild card weekend games. And I was not disappointed. The Texans, they kept it close with the Ravens in the first half. In fact, it was tied at the half. But the Ravens, they had a complete masterclass in the second half of that game. And the Packers and 49ers, they went all the way down to the wire. The Buccaneers and Lions, also a very good game. It was great to see a very competitive game, back and forth. And Chiefs and Bills, once again, did not disappoint. Whenever we see the Chiefs and Bills face off against each other, more often than not, it is an absolute classic, absolute cinema, and this past Sunday did not disappoint. Although I do feel bad for Bills kicker Tyler Bass, as he missed the game-tying field goal, and he was faced with harassment on social media. It got to the point where he deleted all of his social media accounts due to all the harassment he was facing. And this is part of why I feel frustrated with a lot of fans sometimes and how they let these games get the best of them. They let the outcomes of these games, they let them control their emotions and how they feel throughout the week. And even if he would have made the field goal, all it would have done was tie the game. The Chiefs had 2 timeouts left, 2 even. Even if he makes the field goal, the Chiefs have 2 timeouts left. I believe it was maybe a minute 40 left with Patrick Mahomes and his reputation. For all we know, the Chiefs could have gotten to field goal range themselves and made a field goal with Harrison Butker themselves to win the game at the end of regulation. But before we get to my predictions for conference championship weekend, I do want to briefly address the coaching news that we got this past week. Antonio Pierce was promoted as the Raiders head coach, and I'm very happy for Antonio Pierce. I have expressed how I don't understand the upside or the benefit to having a defensive-minded guy as a head coach in today's NFL, where it's becoming more of an offensive game. But I can make a slight exception for a guy like Antonio Pierce, a guy that can relate to his players. With Antonio Pierce, as a former player, a little bit more recently, he understands what needs to be done to win games. Someone that has a championship mentality already, as he has a Super Bowl win with the Giants. And I feel like this is a great hire for the Raiders. If I'm a Raiders fan, I am absolutely ecstatic by this hire. Max Crosby had Antonio Pierce's respect. And I really was worried that Mark Davis was not going to learn from his mistake a few years ago when the Raiders had the opportunity to promote Rich Bisaccia as their head coach. But I am relieved that they made the decision to promote Antonio Pierce. The Titans are naming Brian Callahan their next head coach. And Mike Vrabel being let go by the Titans, it did kind of feel confusing. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like this is very similar to when the Dolphins parted ways with Brian Flores, where there wasn't necessarily much wrong with him. I felt like it was more of they felt it was in their best interest to have an offensive-minded guy as the head coach to develop Will Levis, as we saw Will Levis show off his potential this season. Like when the Dolphins hired Mike McDaniel to develop Tua. Tua, despite what people have said about him throughout the year, he had a very stellar season. And this does feel similar. Is Brian Callahan getting on the same level as Mike McDaniel? We'll wait and see. But I think it's a very solid hire for the Titans. But we will see 2-3 years from now if this move was worth it for the Titans. And without further ado, let's get to my conference championship weekend predictions. AFC Championship Game, Chiefs and Ravens. For the Ravens, Mark Andrews and Marlon Humphrey are trending towards playing in this game, while for the Chiefs, Joe Thuney, Kadarius Toney, Derek Nottie, and linebacker WG are questionable for this matchup. We have seen Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes face off 4 times in their careers so far, and the Chiefs appear to be Lamar Jackson's kryptonite, as Lamar Jackson is 1-3 against the Chiefs in his career, while Patrick Mahomes 3-1 against the Ravens in his career. The Ravens versus the Texans last week, Lamar Jackson had 4 total touchdowns in that game. Only 152 passing yards, and am I concerned about that going into this game? To be honest, not necessarily. Because in the regular season, Lamar Jackson didn't have very many passing yards in that game. But as we have seen throughout the year, Lamar Jackson gets better and better each and every single week. As a team last week against the Texans, the Ravens had 229 rushing yards and only allowed 38 rushing yards the entire game. An absolute masterclass by the Ravens in the second half, as I did mention in the beginning of the video. Last week against the Bills, the Chiefs gave up 182 rushing yards. While Isaiah Pacheco, he had 97 rushing yards and a touchdown, averaging 6.5 yards per carry. And in the wild card game against the Dolphins, Pacheco had 89 rushing yards and a touchdown. Travis Kelce, in the 2 playoff games so far, he is starting to look like his old self. He had 75 receiving yards off of 5 catches and 2 touchdowns in the Bills game last week. And against the Dolphins in the wild card round, he had 7 catches for 71 yards. In the 4 games that Patrick Mahomes has played against the Ravens, he averages about 370 passing yards per game, 3 touchdown passes, and an average completion percentage of 72.6%. The matchups within the matchup for this game. The Ravens running game versus the Chiefs run defense. As the Chiefs run defense is the weakest spot on their team, giving up 182 rushing yards last week to the Bills. The Ravens secondary against Travis Kelce is another big key in my opinion, as if the Ravens are going to lose this game, you don't want to have Travis Kelce be the one that wins against you. Take your chances with Valdez-Scantling. I'd say even take your chance with Rashee Rice. Even though Rashee Rice, he had a big game against the Dolphins in the wild card round, but he was relatively quiet against the Bills. If he plays, take your chance with Kadarius Toney. But I anticipate that both defenses will hold their own this game from start to finish. Even though Patrick Mahomes has a very good history against the Ravens, I just think that this Ravens team is a lot different than the last time the Chiefs and Ravens went up against each other. And there's a reason why I did not talk about the spread yet for this game. The Ravens are a 3.5 point favorite, while the over-under is 44.5. I am predicting the Ravens to win this game and advance to Las Vegas by a score of 23-20. I think it will be that kind of a game. It'll be a game where we see both defenses play really well, but at the end of the day, I think the Ravens, they win off of a Justin Tucker game-winning field goal with about a minute and a half left. On to the NFC Championship Game, Lions and 49ers. For the Lions, they signed free agent tight end Zach Ertz to their roster, and I am intrigued to see how he is utilized in Sunday's game. The last time Zach Ertz played against the 49ers, I know it was when he was with the Cardinals, but he had 10 targets in that game, which may feel irrelevant, but I feel like that information may come into play for Sunday's game. Questions and concerns about the Lions' offensive line. Jonah Jackson is expected to be out of this game with a torn meniscus. He did get surgery. He's expected to be out for the NFC Championship Game. But if the Lions happen to advance to the Super Bowl, there is a chance that he may be able to play in that game. And Frank Ragnow is questionable with a knee injury. For the 49ers, star wide receiver Deebo Samuel is questionable with a shoulder injury, but there is no fracture in his shoulder, and that is something the 49ers were very concerned about. But there's no fracture. I would lean towards Deebo Samuel playing in this game. I'd also lean towards Frank Ragnow playing in this game. Amon-Ra St. Brown has had a phenomenal season for the Lions, especially in the 2 playoff games. The wild card round against the Rams, 7 catches, 110 yards. Last week against the Buccaneers, 8 catches, 77 yards, and a touchdown. And as I was watching that game, to find out that Amon-Ra St. Brown had 8 catches in that game, it didn't feel like that to me. It felt like Amon-Ra St. Brown had at least 11, 12 catches in that game. And what I think is going to be a big key in this game, my matchups within the matchups, is going to be the pass defenses. As the pass defenses, they are the weakest part of these two teams. However, last week, the 49ers, they only allowed 194 passing yards against Jordan Love and the Packers. But they did allow 108 rushing yards to Aaron Jones. And we know the Lions like to run the football early and often with David Montgomery and rookie Jahmyr Gibbs. The Lions, they allowed 367 passing yards against Matthew Stafford and the Rams in the wild card round, and 349 passing yards to Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers last week. But they have stopped the run really well in the playoffs so far, only allowing 61 rushing yards to Kyren Williams and only 55 rushing yards to Rachaad White. But Christian McCaffrey is a different player. He is way different than Kyren Williams and Rachaad White, as McCaffrey had 98 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns last week. Can the Lions secondary contain the 49ers wide receivers in the Lions running game? And can the offensive line hold Nick Bosa and Chase Young at bay? As I have talked about since the trade deadline, when the 49ers run that 3-game losing streak, they acquired Chase Young at the trade deadline, and they look like an unstoppable force. They've only had 2 losses since then, one to the Ravens on Christmas night, and in Week 18 against the Rams when they were resting their starters anyway. And once again, there's a reason why I didn't talk about the spread yet. The 49ers are at -7 right now, a 7-point favorite. Over-under is 50.5 points. I think this is going to be a game where experience is going to matter. Jared Goff does have playoff experience. He has a Super Bowl run with the Rams. But with the way the 49ers season ended last year, they are really at that quest to reach that Super Bowl. And out of all the coaches that have yet to be in an NFC Championship game, if there was one you could pick, if you had to pick a coach that has not been to this point in the NFL playoffs in his career, to have a game plan and to have your team ready to go, Dan Campbell would be the consensus number one pick in my opinion. But I think by a score of 35-28, I think the 49ers win and advance to the Super Bowl. And that will do it for my conference championship weekend predictions. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for your support last week for the divisional round predictions video, as that was the third highest viewed video in the history of the channel. Enjoy the games on Sunday, and I'll be back next week for my Super Bowl prediction.